This morning's reading is from Luke 23. I'll read from verse 32. Two other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, they crucified him there, along with the criminals, one on his right, the other on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. They said, "He saved others, let him save himself, if he is God's Messiah, the chosen one." The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was a written notice above him which read, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other criminal rebuked him. "Don't you fear God?" he said. "Since you are under the same sentence, we are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus answered him, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." It was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m, for the sun stopped shining, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two.
Thank you, Sam. Good morning. Glad you are here today on this beautiful summer day. We go from complaining about the rain, now we can complain about the heat. It's like now the transition has finally happened. We get to change that. But I'm glad you're here. And before we jump into this very powerful passage that Sam just read to us, I just had one quick announcement. This Wednesday, we're kicking off a formation course. And formation course has to do with spiritual formation. It's being formed into a person who is like Jesus. That's the idea. Being formed, being transformed. And really, essentially, it's this. It's how to connect with God in a deeper way. It's how to grow as a Christian, how to become a more loving person, become a less anxious person. It's all of these things. And it's also, maybe you just wonder what Counterculture believes, what our theology is, what our kind of our view on various topics is. This is what Formation Course is going to do, all those things. You could essentially say it is the what, the why, and the how of the Christian life. The what, the why, and the how of the Christian life. So I just want to invite you to come out this Wednesday. I think you're going to benefit from it. Maybe you're new to the faith, or maybe you feel kind of dry or stagnant in your faith. This is going to be the place for all of those things. And we'll have some refreshments and stuff each week. It'll be right here at 7 p.m. this Wednesday. I'm going to be there. Hope you'll be there too. So with that, we're diving into our second to last message in the IRL series. And I've kind of, thought of all these different instances where something starts off on a screen, starts off digital, and then goes IRL. And one that came to mind this week as I was thinking about it, because I've thought of so many different things, Tinder, Instagram, Zoom meetings, all these different examples. But one example I thought of is this. Every once in a while, you have a celebrity encounter. There's somebody that you've spent hours and hours of your life, listening to their music, watching their movies, watching their television shows, and then all of a sudden, this person who used to just be in your AirPods or used to just be on a screen, you now are seeing face to face. You're like, whoa, this is crazy. They don't know who you are, right? It's not special for them. They're not excited to see you, but you can be excited to see them. This happened to Becca and I once. Incidentally, we were out doing a little Christmas card photo shoot with a friend who's a really good photographer on North Mississippi. We were there on North Mississippi. This was back in 2016, and this friend who's a very good photographer was taking our photos, and we were kind of blocking the sidewalk, sitting with our son Lion in an entryway of a cool red door. And this person goes by, and he goes, "Cute photo." And I recognized the voice instantaneously. And it turns out it was Fred Armisen of Portlandia. and I pop up and go, Fred, man, I love your work, love your show. Would you want to take one with us? And he sits down. He's like, sure, absolutely. He sits down so happy. And I go, because my son's with us, you can just see my son's feet real tiny down there. But I go, Fred, you're just part of the family. And instantaneously, without skipping a beat, he goes, should I be your baby? Just like exactly like on the show IRL. He'd always been on a screen. Here he was in real life, the king of Portland, Fred Armisen. But one of the most annoying parts of being famous is probably, not being able to go anywhere without being recognized. And some people are kind of built for it. Obviously, Fred's a great sport. He maybe kind of has a little fun with it. Maybe he probably has his off days where he doesn't enjoy it so much. But you get recognized everywhere you go. But I read a story this week about a celebrity not being recognized. Of all people, Rob Zombie, the shock rock metal, screenwriter, horror film, he had a sold out show in Las Vegas a few years back, sold out show, and he arrived to the back of the arena, back of the show, and tried to get in, and security would not allow him into his own show. They wouldn't let him into his own show. They actually grabbed him, forcibly removed him from the premises, kicked him off the property of his own sold out concert. Okay, the star of the show. And as security is grabbing him, he's yelling, want to know why they were throwing him out? They thought he was a homeless man. They thought he was a homeless guy. They're kicking him out of the show. And he's yelling, I'm zombie. They just think he's a crazy guy who thinks he's a zombie. They kick him out of the place. And I honestly have never read a better metaphor for what we're about to look at in the cross. And I've never read a better metaphor for this, because it says in the Gospel of John that he came unto his own, and his own received him not. The crazy claim of the gospel writers, the biographies of Jesus, is that Jesus is the God of Israel, the star of the show, rolling up to Jerusalem, rolling up to the temple complex. He's the star of the show, and they throw him out like trash. They throw him out like he's just some crazy person. They kick him out. If you're surprised to hear me comparing Jesus Christ to Rob Zombie, I just want to say welcome to Counterculture, all right? But he's getting thrown out of his own concert. Essentially, that's what's happening to Jesus. He came unto his own, and his own received him not. So we're talking about the cross. We've arrived at the absolute peak, the absolute focal point, the crux, the climax of the gospel stories. All four gospels make the cross the absolute culmination of their writings. But to us, the cross, we are kind of jaded to it, aren't we? We see it on buildings. We see it carved into marble. We see it in gold around people's necklaces. To us, it is this relic, this sacred kind of, old school, outdated, religious icon. And that's all the cross is to us. It's stained glass. But nothing could be further from the way the cross was understood and perceived to the original followers of Jesus. It could not be more the opposite. It could not be just more utterly, bafflingly different. To them, the cross was a symbol of imperial domination and terror. That was the cross. It was the empire, just absolute brutality, cruelty, and domination, Rome looking you in the face saying, don't mess with us. That's all the cross was. It was horrifying, it was sickening, it was disturbing. And I am going to kind of bring this into high definition focus, not because we like to revel in the gore, not because we just want to, be sadistic and really focus in on how graphic and how gruesome it is, but simply to snap us out of the dull, dozing familiarity. That's what we need. We need to make the cross shocking and stunning in order to make it beautiful again. It has to disturb us and vex us and trouble us before it can bring us to our knees in raptured worship. Look with me in Luke chapter 23, verse 32. 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, this is a hill, and if you go to Jerusalem, you can actually see a hill that actually does resemble a skull, they believe might be the place. They crucified him there, along with the criminals, one on his right, the other on his left. First thing I want to bring to your attention is this: empire is always brutal. Empire is always brutal. Luke calls him a criminal, but all the other gospels call him a thief. But if you do some historical digging, you look into the writings of Josephus and the writings of other contemporaries, you actually discover that this guy was more than likely a revolutionary. Okay, because we're looking at Jesus and a criminal. There's actually 2 of them, one on his right, one on his left. It's commonly referred to as the thief on the cross. But when you look at the way the word for thief was used at the time, it was actually kind of a dismissive, pejorative term that the Romans used for insurrectionists. See, they wouldn't even dignify you with the title of a freedom fighter. They were so dismissive of their opposition. They said, you're not a revolutionary. You're not an insurrectionist. You're not a freedom fighter. You're just a robber. You're just a bandit. You're just a thief. It's like buzzing flies shooing you away. That's how the empire viewed anyone who opposed their domination. And so this thief on the cross, he was probably, depending on what side of the equation you are, you could call him a freedom fighter, an insurrectionist, a rebel, a terrorist. You know, depending on where you sit in society, that's probably how you would view this guy. And these 2 guys, really. And they were being executed. And Jesus is being executed right along with them because he claimed to be king. But there was no king but Caesar. So here he is, and what do the Romans do with anyone who challenges their authority? Well, they subject them to the most shameful, painful, humiliating execution that they possibly can. The Roman philosopher Cicero had this to say about the cross. Cicero, we'll put it on the screen for you, he says that the crucifixion was the most miserable and most painful punishment appropriate to slaves alone. See, in Roman society, you could not be crucified if you were a Roman citizen. There were aristocrats, there were nobility, there was equestrians, there was the Senate, there was finally the emperor. Down below that, there were the plebeians. And even if you were a plebeian, I mean, isn't that just like a great term? Could you call somebody that next time? You plebeian. Yeah, it's great. But anyhow, but even plebeians could be Roman citizens. Plebeians, if you were a citizen, you couldn't be crucified. But then below that, there were the slaves. There were the barbarians. There was anyone who didn't have citizenship. They were worthless. They were refuse. And there were certain people who had value and certain people who did not. And Jesus, he dies the death of a slave. Do you realize that? Jesus was crucified as a slave. He was lynched. It says here that they gambled for his clothing. Get this, these Roman soldiers are so desensitized. Just executing people is so boring to them, they have to invent a game to amuse themselves as the person dies next to them. As he's been scourged, as he's been brutally whipped. I mean, many people would die from the scourging. He's been mocked and spit upon, had a crown of thorns pounded into his brow. He's then had spikes pounded through his wrists and through his feet, then lifted up on a Roman roadside for people to walk by. He's completely naked, by the way. I mean, the artists, do us a favor by putting a loincloth on it, but that's not how the Romans rolled, trust me, okay? So he's there completely stripped naked, just being humiliated as people walk by, as he slowly, sometimes it would take days, would die of asphyxiation. You would die of a slow, gasping breath of asphyxiation. It is just utter powerlessness. That's what it is. It's saying, we are Rome. You do not question us. You do not challenge us. You are nothing to us. And the bodies of crucified people would be thrown into garbage dumps. If Joseph of Arimathea hadn't spoken up, Jesus' body would have just gone to the dump. It's your refuse. You're worthless. You are nothing. And just think of the humiliation that is, you are in absolute agony. There are people rolling dice for your only earthly possession. That's how Jesus dies. That's how Jesus and these two thieves next to him die. Why did God, if you're a believer here, you can go along with me with this, but even if you're not a believer, suppose Jesus is God, imagine that scenario, and God chooses to come at a certain time. Why would he choose to come at the time of the horrors of Roman crucifixion? Of a public, humiliating, agonizing death. Why would he choose to come at the time? I have a thought. I think crucifixion perfectly displays for us vividly what humanity is capable of apart from God. The depths to which humanity can descend in its own pursuits of greed and power and pride. And it also vividly displays to us the lengths to which God will go to love and rescue humanity. You have the perfect culmination. You have humanity doing its absolute worst, and you have God giving his absolute best in a single image. Apart from God, the Bible claims that we're all building our own empires, that we all want to be king, we all want to be our own sovereign. Now, obviously, we know that there's been victims of national empires, there's been victims of corporate empires, but I want to actually draw the attention on us individually, our own personal empires, the way we devote ourselves to building our own little social media empire. The way we build our business empire, our career empire, the way maybe you just try to manicure your house, make it immaculate, make it perfect, and your children walk on eggshells. Maybe your parents did that. As your caregiver, their home was their little empire. I think many in America have grown tired of pastors who are building their ministry empire. Their religious empire, just exploiting people, using people in the name of God to build up their own little kingdoms, their own domains. In the words of Tears for Fears, everybody wants to rule the world. We all have our own little kingdoms. And, when people infringe upon them, if there's an infraction, maybe we don't crucify people, but we lash out, don't we, in our own way? I think we do. I started off the sermon talking about the most famous television show from Portland, but let me briefly talk about the most famous television show from the city that I'm from. That's Albuquerque, New Mexico. That is Breaking Bad. Blue crystal meth. Thank you very much. But there's a scene in Breaking Bad that I think is really relevant to all this. And it's a scene where Jesse Pinkman is trying to convince Walter White that they've made $5 million each. They've made enough money. They should quit. They should stop. He said, nobody else has to die. Nobody else has to get hurt. You can go spend time with your family. And Bryan Cranston, Walter White, he, just coldly recounts this tale of he's like, have you ever heard of the company Gray Matter? And he talks about how he had started a company with some colleagues that he met in graduate school, and that he felt slighted by them. He felt betrayed by them. He got, he lost his share in the company, partly through his own fault, but he had nursed this grudge, nursed this grievance. Then Walter White says these words, "You asked me if I was in the meth business or the money business. Neither. I'm in the empire business." The Bible claims that there's a Walter White in each one of us. And you may hear that and you may think, oh, Jesse, that's ridiculous. I'm not trying to build my own empire. I don't make meth. I don't melt bodies inside of barrels. I don't force anyone to refer to me as Heisenberg. No, Jesse, none of this. Yeah, that's why I don't like the Bible. I'm a good person. Well, maybe you won't listen to the Bible. Maybe you won't listen to me, but maybe you'll listen to Albert Camus. Albert Camus is one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century, an existentialist, an absurdist, an atheist. But Albert Camus, in his book, The Fall, describes this attorney in Paris who's a defense attorney. And he spent his life in the cause of social justice. He spent his life defending the marginalized, defending the least of these. He was a good person. He would walk blind people across streets. He would go out of his way for old ladies. He thought of himself as just the pinnacle of morality. But he tells a story in The Fall of how this individual had a road rage encounter with a motorcyclist in which he was humiliated, in which he was, kind of got the brunt end of somebody's bad side. And this is what the character says in The Fall. He says this: "It was no longer possible for me to cherish this fine picture of myself. I was eager to get my revenge, to strike and to conquer. The truth is that every intelligent man, as you know, dreams of being a gangster and ruling over society by force alone." This is my favorite line. "I discovered in myself sweet dreams of oppression. I was on the side of the guilty, the accused, only in exactly so far as their crime caused me no harm. And I was not the victim. But when I was threatened, I became not only a judge in turn, but even more a furious master who wanted, regardless of all laws, to strike down the offender and to get him on his knees." In a city like Portland, we care about justice. We care about the victims. We care about the marginalized, people who are incarcerated. We care about the people on the edges of society. But Albert Camus says this: look at your own life. What about when you're the victim? What about when somebody snubs you? What about when somebody slights you? What about when somebody tramples on your little domain, when they get in your way? The Bible says that each one of us, that we have, that oftentimes in building our own empire, there are people who become collateral damage, who become as disposable as this thief on the cross. Maybe not through outright, domination and oppression, although that does happen sometimes, but oftentimes just through neglect. We're so busy with our priorities, we don't have time for certain people. We're so busy with our own goals, with our own agenda, that people become easy to push to the side and to neglect. And sometimes when somebody wrongs us in the right way, well, we do nurse fantasies, just like this lawyer from Albert Camus' The Fall. And some of us, we've been trampled, have we not? Trampled on by the empire building of others. Maybe you can think of that. You can think of the people who are so caught up in their own agenda, caught up in building their own kingdom, that they trampled all over you. There's a furious emperor. There's a Walter White in each one of us. The Bible claims that until we see the cross as something done by us, we will never see the cross as something done for us. That we need to take our share in the guilt of the cross before we can take our share in the grace of the cross. All right, so empire is always brutal. The next thing is this: the Messiah is deeply unusual. Verse 35. They said, "He saved others, let himself save himself if he's God's Messiah, the chosen one." The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said, "If you're the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was a written notice above him which read, this is the king of the Jews." One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us also." Now, the word Christ, you hear it all the time. It's probably worth pointing out, Christ is not Jesus' last name. I think every once in a while you meet somebody who thinks that, Mary Christ, Joseph Christ. It's like, no. But Christ is a word that is in the Greek, and it comes from the Hebrew word Messiah. And it means king. It means anointed one. You could say crowned one almost. And they're saying, oh yeah, sure, he claimed to be the Messiah. He claimed to be the king. Look at him now. What kind of king is this? The kind of king who dies naked, asphyxiated, crucified. Here's this kind of king, sure. Because the Jews wanted a Messiah. They were longing for a Messiah. There was an anticipated Messiah. But they expected a Messiah who would come and crush their enemies. A Messiah who would liberate them from their exploiters. That there'd be this Messiah who would come and set them free and bring in this golden age of absolute prosperity and joy. They thought their Messiah would be like Luke and would blow up the Death Star. They thought their Messiah would throw the emperor down, a galactic abyss. They thought of a Messiah who would come and have them dance with Ewoks. Like this is what they were looking for. They were looking for just a Messiah who would absolutely come and obliterate all the stormtroopers and set them free. They thought he was going to crush the Romans, not be crushed by the Romans. But here we find a very, very unusual Messiah. We find a Messiah who in some ways he's fulfilling all the prophecies. Like it had been prophesied that he'd open the eyes of the blind, that he would cleanse lepers, that he would heal the sick, that he would raise the dead. And so here's Jesus, he's fulfilling some of these prophecies, but he's not coming to obliterate the Romans. He's not coming to liberate them from their oppressors. He's doing something quite different. In fact, not only is he not destroying his enemies, he's praying for them. Did you notice that? It says that he prayed, "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." In the original language, it's really interesting. They have tenses, and there's a certain tense that actually says he continued saying it. Do you get this? He continued saying it. Imagine this. They pound a spike into his left hand. "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." They pound a spike into his right wrist. "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." They pound the spike through his feet. "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." They lift the cross, and it sinks into the hole in the ground with a sickening thud. "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." This is a very unusual Messiah. And the other Gospels imply that both rebels on his left and on his right were mocking him both, but he was on the cross for 6 hours. A lot can change in 6 hours. And so as the hours drag on, and the mocking continues, and the scorn continues, an unparalleled, radical love just shines out from the pervasive cruelty, and something changes in the hearts of one of those thieves, and one of those rebels, and one of those insurrectionists. And he says in verse 40, "Don't you fear God?" He said, "Since you're under the same sentence, we're punished justly. We are getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong." You see, this insurrectionist, he realizes that he has done something wrong. He says, "We're getting what our deeds deserve." I think what he recognizes, certainly if you read the Sermon on the Mount, it's the conclusion you would draw, what you'd come to is that I think he realizes to some degree that he's playing the same game as the Romans. He's been playing a game of violence. He's been playing a game of power. He's been playing a game of domination. Yeah, he's a revolutionary. He's an underdog. He's the little guy, and he's losing the game, clearly, because he's being executed. But he's been playing the same power games, the same games of domination that the Romans are living. But then he sees this man in the middle cross, this man in the center cross, is playing a very different game. He's playing something that's otherworldly. He's playing something utterly different because you can imagine, I mean, the Romans were probably so used to it. You know, these people on the cross spitting at them, cursing at them as long as they could draw breath, just heaping curses down on their enemies, heaping curses down on their executioners. But look at the contrast. Jesus, what's he doing? He's praying for his enemies. He's forgiving his enemies, and something moves the heart of this thief on the cross. It's what stirred Martin Luther King Jr. I realize that we're in an election year. We're in an election year, and we're living in a city where, let's face it, that has had almost more political violence than anywhere else in the United States. Last year, I read a cover story in The Atlantic cataloging the political violence that happened in Portland in 2020, and all of the experts expect that there's only going to be more in 2024. I hope not. I pray not. I pray for the peace of this city, for the shalom of this city. But this revolutionary, he was playing the same game of so many others, that we need to take down the oppressor. We need to, eat the rich, that we need to pull down these oppressive, exploitative systems and everything. But Martin Luther King Jr. preaching on Jesus' ethic of unending love, because we got to remember, Martin Luther King Jr. was a reverend. He said this, it's absolutely breathtaking. The ultimate weakness of violence is that it is a descending spiral, begetting the very thing it seeks to destroy. Instead of diminishing evil, it multiplies it. Returning violence for violence multiplies violence, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. The strong person is the person who can cut off the chain of hate, the chain of evil. We sometimes, think, well, we're just getting even. They're the one who wronged us. You could think about it politically. You can think about it socially. You can think about it personally. Think about it in your relationship with your siblings. Think about it in the relationship with your roommates, at work, with your partner, with your spouse, with your significant other. Well, they started it. I was just getting even. They were the aggressor. They were the one in the wrong. And I was just, getting back. I was just defending myself. They're the fascists. They're the exploiters. We're the liberators. We're the freedom fighters. But Charlie Dates, the pastor of a legendary black church in Chicago, he says this: without the Holy Spirit in our hearts, when the oppressed get power, we just end up becoming oppressors ourselves. When you hate your enemies, you become like them. When you love your enemies, you lead them. And that's what shines forth from this pitch darkness of unimaginable cruelty. Comes kindness and grace and love. And it has utterly changed the world. And I've pointed this out at other times, and I'll probably point it out again in the future. But the reason why we live in a world that doesn't crucify people is because of the influence of Christ. Because he started a different kind of revolution. He started a true countercultural culture, and it's what made Western society what it is. And we could look into that more. Trust me, that's something that's been acknowledged by secular philosophers and historians across the gamut, as well as believers. But when you hate your enemies, you become just like them. When you love your enemies, you lead them. Now, this insurrectionist, this thief on the cross says, remember me when you come into your kingdom. What faith? What faith to believe that this guy who's being executed, this guy who's slowly bleeding to death, slowly being asphyxiated on a cross next to him, it has a kingdom. But he somehow has the faith to see it. He somehow has the faith to believe it. It's a new kingdom, It's a different kingdom. It's an otherworldly kingdom. It's a different paradigm, one not of domination and greed and exploitation and self-interest and violence, but it's a different kingdom. It's a kingdom where the ruler is a servant and where every single person is loved and has value. That's the kingdom of God. Now, our final thought this morning is this, is that God is now fully accessible. So, empire is always brutal. The Messiah is deeply unusual. And then finally, God is now fully accessible. Verse 42, it was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m. For the sun stopped shining, and the curtain in the temple was torn in two. It's kind of poetic, right? At Jesus' birth, there was light in the middle of the night. And then at Jesus' death, there was darkness in the middle of the day. But if there's anything, that you'd think would be, oh, well, this is just poetic. This is just mythology. This is just poetic language. It's just, the authors saying how much it meant to them that Jesus died. This wasn't a real darkness. Well, it's interesting. The most fantastical part of this whole story is actually the part that secular historians record. It's kind of interesting. Check this out. Phlegon, a Greek historian writing in 137, says, in the 4th year, however, of Olympiad 202, see, they had a very different dating system, obviously, an eclipse of the sun happened, greater and more excellent than any that had ever happened before. At the 6th hour, day turned into night, so that stars were seen in the sky, and an earthquake in Bithynia toppled many buildings of the city of Nicaea. He's not even writing about Jesus. This is just a Greek historian writing. There's actually another historian named Thales who is aware of Jesus. He's running in AD 50, and then Julius Africanus later interacts with it and talks about Jesus. But here are historians saying that this darkness was real. This darkness actually happened. And to anyone acquainted with the Jewish story, because Jesus, he's the Jewish Messiah, he's a Jewish rabbi, right? They would know that darkness is from the Exodus story. Darkness is a symbol of judgment. When God judged Pharaoh for his oppression, when God judged Pharaoh for his evil and his injustice and his exploitation, there was darkness over the whole land. But now the darkness, who's the darkness falling on? The darkness is falling on Jesus. It's not Pharaoh's son who's going to die. Who is it? It's the Son of God who's dying. And there's darkness over him. And essentially, this is why judgment is falling on Jesus, is this. When you've been a victim, and I've been a victim in my life, maybe at some point I'll give you the details of that, but I've been a victim in my life in some very profound and significant ways. Let me just say this. When you've been a victim, and some of you have too, when you've been a real victim, you want justice. You want someone to pay. You don't want to just let it go. You don't want to be like, oh, it's no big deal. It's fine. Everything's fine. No, you want justice. And the Bible says that God is a God of justice. But he finds himself in a real dilemma, because the thing is, we are not each and only just victims. We are victimizers. We are not just victims, we are villains. That we haven't just been hurt, we've also hurt. And I know that in my own life, I can think of the faces of people I've hurt. And I can think of the faces of people who've hurt me. And so what's a God of love and justice to do? Does he just condemn and pour out justice and destroy the wrongdoers? Well, how could he do that if he's a God of love? How could he do that if he's ravished and attached and his heart is moved and wrapped up and invested in humanity? What does he do? He says, I'm a God of love. I'm a God of justice. Somebody has to pay. I'll do it. I'll be the one who pays. And Jesus on the cross, he paid our debt. The way Romans puts it, it says, God sent his son in the likeness of sinful flesh, that he might condemn sin in the flesh, that the righteous requirement of the law might be fulfilled in us. Jesus took our condemnation so that we could have his acceptance. Verse 42, then the thief said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus answered, truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. Now, the word paradise that's used here actually is a Persian word. It comes from where a king would have this garden where he would walk, and he would walk in intimacy with his friends, with his advisors, with his family members, in this sacred garden. And surely Luke has in his mind, knowing the Old Testament, the Garden of Eden, right? That's where it all began. That God, and the real focus of this is Jesus says, you will be with me in paradise. That what makes it paradise is this unrestrained, uninhibited relationship. That God is a God of relationship, that he's a God of love, that he wants intimacy with us. And that's what really ultimately makes it paradise, is that we're with him. But the story of the Bible is that we started off in a partnership with God. God is a ruler. He loves to share his power. And we were in a partnership with God as his images, in intimacy with him, that we were ruling paradise together. But instead, we rebelled. There was a power grab. And because of this power grab, we've been separated from God, and that human history has been this cycle of violence and broken relationships and betrayals and exploitation and difficulty, because we've been cut off from this God of love who loves to share his power. And instead of sharing our power, we want to hoard our power. But what is the hope of the Bible ultimately? Is that ultimately we'd be back in the garden. That we'd be back in intimacy with God. We'd be back near to God, close to God, in this mutual giving and serving and loving in paradise. The thing that I think is breathtaking as a picture of all this is that it says that the veil of the temple was torn in two. Okay, I'll just keep this real brief, but picture paradise in your mind, kind of get the Garden of Eden vibe in your mind. The temple was meant to be a picture of the Garden of Eden. The temple in Jerusalem was engraved with pomegranates and flowers and fruits and trees. And it says in Genesis that when they were kicked out of Eden, that there was an angel, a cherubim put outside of it. In the temple, there were cherubims on the curtain. There were cherubims on the Ark of the Covenant. A little Indiana Jones reference there, Nazis' faces melting off. But like the Ark of the Covenant had cherubim on it. And this is all meant to point to Eden. But nobody could go in the temple. The temple was utterly inaccessible. Only one person could go in the temple once a year, the high priest. And even he could be struck dead, and he had to go in with a sacrifice, go in with blood. There was nobody who could come into paradise. But here, as Jesus dies on the cross, as he pays our debt, as he dies in our place, as he dies forgiving his enemies, saying, Father, forgive them, the veil of the temple is torn in two, as if God is saying, come on in. Come back in. There's an old Scottish preacher, it's a clip, you can look it up by this Scottish preacher named Alistair Begg. But he tells this great story about, imagine this thief, he dies, right? They both die on those horrid instruments of oppression. But imagine he's in paradise, and Alistair Begg kind of playfully imagines somebody interrogating this rebel and saying, hey, how did you get here? Did you live a good life? Did you live a moral life? Did you live an exemplary life? Were you a good person? The thief, the rebel, he's looking around. He's like, no, I did not. It's like, did you keep the 10 Commandments? Were you exemplary in your obedience to all of the laws of Moses? Did you do all of this? The thief's like, not exactly. How did you get here? How are you here? How are you in heaven? How are you in paradise? How are you in the resurrection of the righteous? The man on the middle cross told me I could come. And that's the gospel. That's the gospel for all of us, is that the man on the middle cross told us we could come. We're going to go into communion now. Lord, we thank you. We thank you, God, that you are a God of justice, that you care about the victims. You care about those who are exploited. That's why you joined them. God, we thank you that you're also a God of love, because the truth is we've all hurt people. We've all tried to build our own little kingdoms. We've all tried to build our own little empires, God. But we thank you that you invite us into paradise, that you invite us into a world where we don't hoard our power, we share it. We serve, we give, we love. You know, if this sermon has moved you and you're new to the things of faith, new to the things of Jesus, I just want to invite you. There's a little card on your seat. You could indicate that you want to get baptized. You could indicate that you want to become a follower of Jesus. You just want to accept God's free gift of grace the way that thief on the cross did. We'd love to pray with you. We'd love to join you in that as you begin your relationship with God. We're going to take communion now, and communion is just remembering Jesus' blood, remembering his broken body, saying, God, your love is the thing that nourishes me. Your love is the thing that sustains me. Your love is what I need to live a life of beauty and of grace and of kindness and of love towards others. So we're going to take communion now. We'll have the prayer team available on the right and the left. The prayer team will be available. Maybe you just had a hard week. Maybe you just had like a stressful week at your job. Maybe you got in a fight with your husband, your wife, your partner, your whatever. Maybe you're just going through it. We got the prayer team available for you. Maybe you want to take that step and get baptized. You could tell that to the prayer team. And but we're going to worship and sing. And this is actually a song Becca wrote about the thief on the cross. So just take communion and listen to the words of this song.
This is Jesus, King of the Jews. I'm your apostle, leaving too soon. Well, how much does it take to buy my loyalty away? For a kiss on the cheek, how fragile my faith, how fragile my faith, how fragile my faith. This is Jesus, King of the Jews. And I am a soldier standing under you. Well, what worth is a man who claims he is God? So I cast my lots and I harden my heart, and I harden my heart, and I harden my heart. This is Jesus, King of the Jews. And I am a robber right beside you. Oh God, may I see that my sin put you there, and may you reply, child, I did this for you. And I'll see you in paradise. 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 This is Jesus, King of us all. He opened not his mouth so he could speak to us all. Oh, doubter, mocker, rebel and thief, I carried your burden so you'd be set free. And you'd be with me. You'd always be with me. Where I wanted you